I'm John Heilemann, and this is the Hell and High Water Podcast. My guest today, CBS News, political impresario, John Dickerson.
I'm John Dickerson, and the state of our nation is fragile and jittery, and we're all trying to figure out what the new things that give us direction and comfort are. But we're still surrounded by good human beings. We just have to pay attention to what they're doing and not what the people who are adding to this instability are doing.
Leader McConnell and Senate Republicans insisted they wanted a solution to the debt ceiling, but said Democrats must raise it alone by going through a drawn-out, convoluted, and risky reconciliation process. That was simply unacceptable to my caucus. And yesterday, Senate Republicans finally realized that their obstruction was not going to work. I very much thank, my Democratic colleagues for showing our unity in solving this Republican-manufactured crisis. Despite immense opposition from Leader McConnell and members of his conference, our caucus held together, and we've pulled our country back from the cliff's edge that Republicans tried to push us over.
So, John Dickerson, welcome to Hell and High Water. It's great to have you here, and to be able to listen to Chuck Schumer with you together. As you know, I feel like large chunks of my career have been spent like listening to sound bites with you, and then analyzing them, picking them over, so we can do some of that today. So Schumer, as he said, this is a 3-minute speech Schumer gave at the end of last week, and while he's giving it, Joe Manchin is behind him, literally with his head in his hands, and then gets up and storms off. Then later is reported to have said that that Schumer's speech is fucking stupid. And everyone's giving Schumer shit for this, for what he said. These various attacks on the Republicans within that bite. He uses the word risky about 9 times in 3 minutes. And I hear everybody's upset at Schumer, or at least some number of people are, not probably the left, but a lot of people are upset at Schumer. And I wonder to myself, how is that just not a totally accurate description of what happened? Maybe not politic, if you're trying to make a deal with Mitch McConnell, but it seems like that's all just true.
Well, I think you're right. And also, if you look at what McConnell was trying to do, and the larger strategy that Republicans are employing is to make the Democrats look like they are in disarray, that they are responsible for the country's calamity, that they are the ones who both caused and are not solving the debt limit crisis. And oh, by the way, in addition to their political effort to make the Democrats look disunified and like they don't know what they're doing, the Democrats are giving people good evidence of that as they try to work out their difference between the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill. So, Schumer's got about 4 audiences there that he's trying to talk to, and most of those audiences, Manchin and Sinema are one of them, but the other audiences are the ones that want to hear him rallying Democrats and talking about Democratic unity, because there are so many other instances of Democratic disunity.
Progressives get mad and say, why don't you guys ever talk about Republicans? They're really, I'm like, look, it's true. Okay, can we just take it as read that Republicans have become a nihilistic party, and I would say in many respects an anti-democratic party in addition to being nihilistic. But it is also true that Democrats have every vote they need to do everything they want to do right now. They control the United States House, and they have it's very tricky, but on reconciliation, they could pass the large bill, the large social spending bill, the $3.5 trillion bill. If they had unity, they could pass it tomorrow. And so their fate is within their hands, Democrats. And if they were as unified as Republicans always are, these things would be done already. But the reality is that they have a couple of members named Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema who are not really with the program. So just talk to me about, do you think Democrats in disarray is fair? Or do you think Democrats in disarray is a trope that we in the media like to use when in fact they're it's hinky. These are just the usual things you got to get through to eventually get to victory.
Well, the Democrats in disarray has gotten to be a bit of a problem because, the Democratic Party, as Will Rogers said, I'm not a member of an organized party, I'm a Democrat. There has always been a tradition, and that's fine, and that should be nodded to. But what we don't want to do is recline into Dems in disarray to misunderstand, and I know you're not doing this, but a lot of people do, to misunderstand the distinctions between the difficulties the two parties are having. Right. And it's possible for two parties to have difficulties going on and have that happen at the same time without embracing any kind of parallelism. Right. They're having difficulties in each party for very different reasons. The Democratic Party is having difficulty because they have a diverse party. If you look at West Virginia, hasn't voted for a single county in West Virginia, hasn't voted for a Democrat since 2008. That's the state Joe Manchin lives in. Then you look at some of these blue districts that the squad come from, they haven't voted for a Republican in those districts since Ronald Reagan. So you've got to please those people on those ends of the spectrum of the Democratic Party. That's hard enough. And then the margins are as close as they possibly could be in the Senate. And then Nancy Pelosi's got almost as close a margin in the House. So you've got a diverse party with tight margins. That is going to be a challenge for any party. So that's what the Democrats are facing. The Republicans are facing a whole different set of calamities. And the main one to me that's on my mind is that you've got an ex-president who we saw repeatedly try to break the law. And it is the price of admission for ambitious Republicans in that party to say that he should be the nominee again.
Yes.
Forget about evaluating what he did. This is a perspective view that you have to say in order to do well in the party that you think he should be the nominee again. This is a person who we saw this week was proved by the people who were involved who have repeatedly tried to get the Department of Justice to overthrow a free and fair election. Anyway, so those are two different sets of challenges, and I think those are...
Yes, this is why I'm not a big fan of false equivalence on this, because it's like, yes, both parties have their challenges, and yes, I mean, one of them is the challenge of any party that aspires to be a national governing party, and if you're going to be a big national governing party, you have diversity and challenges in your caucus. That's true. But the Republican challenge is much deeper. Are we at the point now where the Republican policies and posture towards governing is so extreme and so geared just to the furthest right extremes of the Republican base that Republicans are a shrinking party that is now risking being alienating the middle to such an extent that they can never govern again?
Well, we're going to have to see where people turn out and how. It didn't work for Donald Trump. He was a one-term president because he ran the kind of politics that you're talking about, arguing basically that the base wasn't shrinking, that he could increase the base, and even though demographically the Republican voter is a smaller share of America, it could be a larger share of the electorate if he got them all to turn out. And he did get a lot of people to turn out, and he made a little bit of inroads with Hispanics and African Americans. But he's a singular case.
Thank God.
Yeah, but in the midterms, and this is obviously what's got Schumer worried and Pelosi and Biden too, it could very well be the case that just being anti-Democrats, anti-woke, anti-liberal could be a sufficient turnout model for Republicans to take back both houses. And at that point, Republicans are think that this is the way to go. In addition to the fact that Donald Trump is setting the purchase or the entry price for anybody who wants to run for president, whether he runs for president or not, the market he created and the attributes he displayed are the ones that you need to have, it seems to me at the moment, to try to be the nominee in that party. And that all is a kind of politics of the kind that you described with respect to Texas. I do political stories now, but I do a lot of other kinds of stories too, which is really the whole reason I got into this business, was to tell stories, and that's been just a thrill.
In the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning, and you're talking about influence and pushing, top Senate fundraiser stands in path of campaign overhaul. This is by Gail Gibson, and she says in her article here, if any plans to change the way politicians raise and spend money is going to fly this year, it first must squeeze past Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, it's Russ Feingold, the senator from Wisconsin, calls him the Darth Vader of campaign finance reform. He is standing in the way of all of this. As you know, in the Senate, one senator can do an awful lot by filibustering reform, and it takes 60 votes to override him. And so far, the proponents of reform haven't been able to muster those 60 votes. So one man is really holding back the wave here.
I know two things about that. One, Mitch McConnell was a pain in the ass, back in 1997. Two, John Dickerson, your voice hasn't aged a day since then. Is that where do you feel like you got your taste for TV there? I know you did TV before you even started magazines there, right? Like you had a little television experience as a kid.
Well,
and your mom, of course, but there's a lot of things to say here.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never wanted to go. In fact, I never had any plans to go into television at all, in part because I watched my mom's experience, and also because I thought writing is, what I loved. And so why would I ever change from that? And and I still write and still, think there are only certain kinds of things you can say through writing that you can't on television. Sure. My first time ever on TV was on Court TV. And then basically did, followed the TV career that you probably did too, which is a lot of C-SPAN and then some, sort of weekend MSNBC, Fox, and CNN, like Saturday morning.
What has it been like to go from someone who was a very good, someone who not only loved writing, but who in some ways like wrote in especially in your period of time at Slate where, with a kind of clarity and precision and illuminative quality that I always admired, even when I didn't want to, for competitive reasons, to then suddenly be in these very high profile positions where there's so much, it's about a lot of things other than, the things that we most value, where it's like in those pieces, it's like, how smart can I be? How many new insights can I bring? How can I balance all of the things that I want to balance and make this thing that's not meant for mass network audience consumption? I'm trying to write to smart people who want to understand politics. That was the best of the stuff you did as a writer. And all of a sudden you're now having to communicate to, and all the compromises involved in trying to communicate about politics to a much larger, more general interest audience. Just, I guess, talk about that transition as much as anything else.
Well, it's tough, and also you can't have the words sit still and really, once they come out of your mouth, they're gone, and they can be sheared off and misunderstood, and the way you explain things, which is at the base of what we do, has to change a lot. So it's taken me a long time to learn how to use television in a way that gets at those issues. The way I switched from writing to television was through Face the Nation, and that was at its heart about asking questions, which is really what Time Magazine was, and Slate was a little bit less that, because it was fast takes on, so you did reporting, but not in the way you did for a Time Magazine piece. But basically I tried to approach Face the Nation the way we would any story you're working on, which is at the heart of those stories are questions. And what are the most important questions, and what are the best ways to get those out into the world? And the challenge there that became really fun was the puzzle of how to try to get lawmakers who were increasingly not just spinning, but outright lying, how to get them to convey information in some fashion that was useful for people. So I saw similarities to the print job. It was just I wasn't doing the analysis and the writing part of that puzzle.
Right.
The fun part of being in 60 Minutes and now at Sunday Morning is that you can get back to telling stories, which is kind of what politics at its most. God, I don't need to tell you. The writing you've done and the television you do about politics is about the story of politics. And it's not just the frivolous horse race. It's that we are a storytelling people. And the way we communicate these ideas is through story. And so I do political stories now, but I do a lot of other kinds of stories too, which is really the whole reason I got into this business, was to tell stories. And that's been just a thrill.
In some level, somebody who didn't know you, John, would step away and say, well, of course he's ended up in television because of his mom, who I've mentioned a couple times now, Nancy Dickerson, who was a big figure in the television business. Someone who was at CBS and was at NBC, was I think the first female correspondent at CBS News, and was the first person to talk to President Kennedy after his inauguration. Was a storied career, and especially an exemplary one for a lot of women journalists. You wrote a book about her. It was your first book. Your second book was about the campaign trail, The Whistle Stop, which is a historical book about the campaign trail. And I'm going to play a clip of your mom from 1987 where she's talking. We can hear both what your mother sounded like, and she's talking about the campaign trail at the same time. And then we can do a little dissection of that on the other side. So let's play a little Nancy Dickerson here.
Medium is no longer the message. Television is politics. It's incredible. In the last election, it was entirely different when we used to go out and cover candidates who would be going around and kissing babies and, as LBJ used to say, pressing the flesh and all. They don't bother to do that now. When you cover a candidate today, you go to a television studio and cover the way he makes his television commercials. And that is a tremendous difference. And if he doesn't make good television commercials, chances are he will lose.
So there's a bunch of things to ask about this. One of which is, you wrote this book about your mom called On Her Trail, and it's a book that is a book that portrays a complex relationship between you and her, and I want you to talk about that, and also fold it into this sort of, the insights that she had that you could, even despite some of the complexities of the relationship, some of the insights she had that seem to echo things you're now saying. Like no matter how complicated your relationship is with your parents, you end up being their kid. And,
Sure.
and so I just want you to riff on your mom a little bit here.
Sure. Well, it's thank you for asking. It was so she died 24 years ago, which is important because the career that she had all happened kind of. I wasn't either alive or old enough to know what was going on. She had me when she was 42, and then NBC didn't renew her contract in 1973. I was only 5 years old. So I didn't see, and the book is really about when she died, being the custodian of all of her materials, from her journals when she was a little girl of 8 years old, all the way through her life, all her journals, which is quite a thing for a son to read through. And my relationship with her had been, I was no picnic. Speaking of picnics, as a kid, my parents were divorced when I was 13. She had gone through this public collapse of her career. She was probably one of the most famous women in America for a long time. Then NBC didn't think she was worth renewing her contract, and so she was off on her own. There weren't 100 other cable channels she could have gone to. It's one of the sadnesses of her career that she would have, had she not gotten sick and died. I mean, she would have been on TV after she left NBC. She would have been on MSNBC. She would have been on CNN. She would have had lots of places to go. And in looking back on her career, and particularly every minute I get older, I have a lot more empathy than I did certainly when I was a teenager. And she was a pretty amazing person, particularly when that I know what she was going through personally. As far as the politics are concerned, it's funny. She came in with John Kennedy, essentially. She was a Roman Catholic when he was, and that suddenly became a cool thing. As the first television president, really, and as the first glamour president, what she talks about in 1987 is the result, basically, of Kennedy's success.
Yes, 100%.
So she is talking about something that is a part of her ascension, in a way. And it's funny to think about the television commercial she's talking about in 1987. Well, Dukakis, you could argue, it either wounds his campaign or ends it by basically the tank moment, which is creating a television moment. It's not pressing the flesh, it's creating a moment, and that moment, which was made entirely created for the cameras, ends up being the one that the Bush campaign uses. Now, there's a lot of other things that happened in that campaign.
Sure.
But it's a television moment that was a part of that campaign, and now, of course, we see it even worse. Although it's funny, when you and I covered John McCain, that was a kind of presidential campaign that was similar to the kind she was pining for in 1987, which is what made it singular and different. When your own ambition is hooked up to those negative attributes, you develop a situation in which that becomes the new way of politics for that party, and Donald Trump doesn't have to run again. Those are all still now in place. Republican lawmakers they have a duty right now. Now, let a little time pass to accommodate the freshness of the news, accommodate the president's idiosyncrasies. But at some point, if the president continues to claim fraud and that this is a stolen election, he will be burning Democratic furniture. And there will be members of his party who will know better. And the danger politically for them is that in this moment, when they know better, it becomes the verdict on their careers. They knew better and they did nothing.
Burning Democratic furniture. If this goes on much longer, he'll be burning Democratic furniture. Well, fuck yeah. I mean, he burned all the furniture, burned the furniture factory, burned the house down, burned the apartment complex down, burned it all down, burned the whole thing to the ground. So prescient, John Dickerson, very well done. But as we sit here today in October of 2021, and the vast majority of elected Republicans continue to abet actively or passively this insane, pernicious conspiracy theory, do they know better?
Well,
and if they do know better, is there really going to be a penalty? Do they care about their legacies? And is there going to be any kind of cost to this insane thing that we're witnessing? I say insane and deeply pernicious.
So I'd like to engage in, I think, the reverse form of confirmation bias, which is I would like to think that what I meant was the cost in the cosmic sense.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to think that either it sounded like, or maybe I even believed at the time, so much has happened to make me not believe this. I'd like to think I had. Of course. But I thought there might be an actual cost, that you would get penalized for not speaking out. No, it's become the purchase price of future success in the party, that you either outright deny that Joe Biden won the election fair and square, or that you play footsie with that idea to maintain viability in the party. I mean, Chris Wallace recently on Fox tried to get Congressman Steve Scalise to admit that Joe Biden had won in 2020 in the election.
I guess the question is, do you think the election, last time I promise, do you think the election was stolen or not? I understand you think there were irregularities and things that need to be fixed. Do you think the election was stolen?
Yeah. And it's not just irregular. It's states that did not follow the laws set, which the Constitution says they're supposed to follow.
And he wouldn't do it. Here you have a leadership of the Republican Party so I think that cosmically, I think that in a democratic, in these United States, in our government, to have a president lying about the sanctity of the election. I mean, the elections that adjudicate our disputes are sort of the foundation of this whole business we're involved in. And to have not stood up to try to protect that when it was assaulted by him, I think is a stain on those who knew better. And they know better now. They know better today.
Right.
So I think it's a cosmic stain, but I think politically in the party, all of the evidence is that that you will pay a severe penalty if you say it out loud, and it's getting worse. I mean, you know, there is an effort to disappear what happened on the 6th.
Yes.
You know, it's extraordinary.
To cast it as a positive thing, the president casts it as a great day for patriots who are standing up to what he calls the real big lie, which is that the election itself is the real big lie. He's like now turned them into heroes,
right? And
they're turning those people who've been arrested for taking American flag poles and beating cops or trying to beat cops to death. He calls them heroes. He's trying to turn them into martyrs.
And you see. You see Mike Pence, for example, who the president put a target on his back by asking him to do something he had no power to do, to the point where some of those supporters were saying, hang Mike Pence. And Mike Pence is now saying
they want to use that one day to try and demean the character and intentions of 74 million Americans who believed we could be strong again and prosperous again.
So everybody's kind of getting further and further away from the 6th of January. And I think that is one of the great challenges we face now, because the attributes that are required to do that are self-actualizing, which is to say people are engaging in this behavior without Donald Trump having to get on the phone to call them and say, please.
Correct.
And so when you're motivated when your own ambition is hooked up to those negative attributes, you develop a situation in which that becomes the new way of politics for that party. And Donald Trump doesn't have to run again. Right. Those are all still now in place.
But I think what you mean is that there's a moral stain on some of these people, in addition to a cosmic stain. Like I know you would never say they're quote evil, but there is like this rises to the level of moral transgress. At least it does to me, even though I'm not a religious man like you. I think there's a moral that is the price they're going to pay, not a political price, but there's a moral stain that corresponds to the cosmic stain.
And you don't have to be religious. You just can be a secular person who cares about America and go back to the founders and look at the founder who was the one who was most admired. It was George Washington. And he was so admired because what everybody could depend on and use him as the model for the presidency was that he would do the right thing when no one was looking. Okay? Right. And that even if his political motivations wanted him to go some other way, they knew he would have virtue that would be a guard against the perniciousness of ambition. So you don't have to be religious. You just have to. Yeah. And there's a wholesale looking the other way, and we saw it during the Trump administration. And okay, that's its own thing. But now you have members of the Department of Justice who say, no, he repeatedly called to get us to try to do something illegal.
Yes.
And you have members of the Republican Party saying, well, he didn't do it in the end, so it's okay, right? So the murder didn't happen, but his repeated planning for it, that's okay. This used to be what lots and lots of voters and politicians talked about, was the necessity of a moral code and standards at the center of your political life, because it was such a challenge, you would have to maintain those moral standards and codes. And so to hear them just cast aside so easily, or then the next step, which is the creation of excuses for moral failings and shortcomings, which are no little tiny quibbles or problems or peccadillos. These are big ones. These are huge and go to the center of the democratic experiment. To see a new culture of coming up with excuses for them is our current challenge.
Ladies and gentlemen, the great John Dickerson here on Hell and High Water. See you next time.